Hey guys, it is time for reading. Get out your The Cabin Faced West. We just read the first chapter back Thursday. Last Thursday we read it. This is a family, 1700s, Revolutionary War time, the late 1700s. And Anne and her family have moved west. They have left the cities and the life that they know in the east, and they have headed out the frontier. Now, this is earlier, of course, than Laura Ingalls' time, probably 50-ish years, 30 to 50 years. So when we meet Anne, she has a baby in her family, and she has two older brothers. And her brothers have come up with a rule that they can't say anything negative about the West because they've not been here very long. Everything's new. They're having to build everything. They've left everything that they've known, but the rule is they can't say anything negative about the West, which is a good rule to come up with in your family. Nobody likes a grumbler. Nobody likes negativeness. It's kind of contagious negativeness. If somebody's talking badly about something, oftentimes that brings everybody down and makes the situation worse. This is what Anne's brothers, David and Daniel, have come up with the rule. And what was the consequence if anyone said anything negative about the West? Do you remember? A bucket of ice cold water poured on your head? Okay. So that's the rules of their game. Anne, when we left her, had gone down to the road to see what's happening. They don't have many neighbors, and the neighbors that they have are not girls, and most of them not around her age. But there is a boy that lives down the street that had moved in. That is her age, but she's not very excited because it is a boy and they don't really have a whole lot in common. There are two words that it mentioned in the first paragraph, first chapter, that Anne just hates to hear. Do you remember what those two words were? Because these two words just were kind of empty to Anne. She just felt like when she heard these words, they really didn't mean anything. It was just like somebody was putting her off, almost like excuses. Do you remember what they were? I hope somebody did. Someday. She doesn't want to hear someday. When she hears somebody say, oh, someday we'll do that. Oh, someday we'll go there. Oh, someday we'll build that. And she is not interested in those two words. So let's see what happens in chapter 2. Of all the places on her father's hill, Anne liked the road best. She had a feeling about the road. Sometimes her mother said she had a feeling in her bones. She couldn't explain it. It was just there. That was the way Anne was about the road. As she stood now looking down where the road dropped over the hill and melted away under the great trees and tangled grapevines, Anne felt the usual excitement. It was silly to feel that way, she told herself. Nothing ever happened at this end of the road. Everything exciting was at the other end, the Gettysburg end. What state? Gettysburg. Where'd they come from? Pennsylvania. Certainly there was nothing exciting about the road itself. Anne shuddered when she remembered the long, weary miles the road took up each of those dreadful mountains and the slipping, sliding miles down the other sides. Yet, when Anne was alone, she usually came right here. It was almost as if the road held some kind of special promise for her. She scuffed at a pebble with her bare toes and laughed. I must be getting wilderness fever, she said half aloud, to be thinking like that. All the same, Anne felt better as she walked over to her favorite sitting spot at the side of the road where a group of trees formed a cozy half circle at her back. Do you have a special sitting spot outside in your yard? Some place that you just like to go sit, maybe sit and think, sit and sing, sit and read. If you don't have one, try to find one. It's kind of cool. She dropped down on the ground, smoothed out her yellow linsey, that's the type of cloth it was, skirt, and opened her brown book. Remember, what was her brown book? Her journal. With her eyes half closed, she turned over in her mind what she wanted to write. Turned over in her mind. She was thinking. It's kind of a neat way to put it, turning over in her mind. Because when you're thinking, you're turning things over in your mind. Behind her, she could hear the sounds that meant evening. Daniel was having trouble with 2 cows. She could tell by the way he was he was urging them forward, and by the stop-and-go sound of the cowbells. David must have brought the evening water up from the spring because Anne could hear him in front of the cabin calling to Daniel. Are you having a hard time with those cows, Daniel? Anne could picture David's twinkle as he tried to catch Daniel in a complaint. Tried to catch him in a complaint. She could also picture very clearly indeed Daniel's scowl as he rumbled back his answer. These are the 2 most stubborn, he began, but then he stopped short. What was he going to say? Stubborn, wasn't he? Stubborn cows. But he changed it. These are the 2 most cooperating, obedient cows this side of the Alleghenies, he roared. He hadn't been caught yet. Anne smiled to herself, and turned in her diary. Almost caught him. Today I worked in the vegetable garden, she wrote carefully in small, neat letters, and I churned. Churned? What was she making? Butter. I helped dip candles. Okay, back to our Laura dipping candles. She read what she had written, and she shook her head impatiently. It wasn't what she had meant to write at all. Quickly she added, I am sitting by the road, which is very empty. I wish Margaret were here. Nothing ever happens. Anne was writing so fast now that her letters were beginning to go crooked down the page. Nothing, she wrote again. Who was Margaret? Her cousin back east in Gettysburg, who had given her the journal. Just at that moment, however, something did happen. As she bent over her diary, Anne suddenly felt a strange tickling on the back of her neck. At the same time, there was a rustling noise behind her. She sat very still. She didn't want to look around. Suppose it was one of those mad wolves that had been prowling the forest. Suppose it was one of the gang of horse thieves that had been causing trouble farther west in the county. Suppose it was an unfriendly Indian. There hadn't been any unfriendly Indians on the hill for a long time, but you could never tell. Something brushed across the top of Anne's head, across her scalp, she thought, and jerked her braids around to the front of her shoulders. She just grabbed her hair. Ooh! Came the call of an owl in the tree above. Anne shivered. Maybe it was an Indian imitating an owl. She closed her book slowly, and then, gathering her courage for one swift movement, she jumped to her feet and swung around to face whatever was there. At first, all Anne could see was a grapevine rope dangling from the tree. She followed the rope to where it disappeared in the tree, and there, half hidden among the leaves, was the new squatter boy. One arm was swinging the grapevine rope gently to and fro, and his face was peering over the branch in a teasing grin. Anne put her hands on her hips "Andy McPhail," she called, "just what do you think you're doing?" "Playing." Andy started swinging the rope in wider and wider circles until Anne had to jump back to keep from being hit. Then he dropped the rope to the ground and jumped down after it. "Scared ya, didn't I?" he asked. And before I turn, I'm going to show you. I have a picture, not sure whether that you do. There she is, sitting in her favorite sitting spot. And old Andy McPhail shows up, the new squatter boy. Andy grinned with an impishness that for a moment made Anne think of David, but as she looked at him again, she wondered how she could ever have thought of such a comparison. Do you know what an impishness is? Impish? Kind of elfish? Just kind of it's kind of like a little elfy look. Whatever that is. That's kind of what that puts me to mind of, impish. His dark hair was long and shaggy and as untouched looking as forest undergrowth. He stood with his hands behind his back in a slouch as though his body wasn't used to going anywhere particular or having anything important to do. As he stepped closer to Anne, he jerked his chin awkwardly in the direction of the book she was holding. "I see you're educated." Look at that word. That's not really a word. "I see you're educated," he said. "Where'd you get your learning?" Okay, now hopefully, when you see that word learning, is that how you spell learning? Okay, learning, that's how that's pronounced. We should have an G on the end of it, learning. But look at that, educated. What do you mean there? "I see you're educated," is what he's meaning there. "I see you're educated," he said. "Where'd you get your learning?" Anne thought she caught a wishful look in Andy's eyes, but she must have been mistaken. He was all mockery now, so she thinks he's making fun of her. "Back home," Anne answered. "I went to school back home in Gettysburg." Andy squinted at the sky. "Back home," he repeated thoughtfully as though he were talking to a passing cloud. "Back home," she says, "in Gettysburg." "Well, and what's so funny about that?" Anne snapped. Andy slowly brought his attention down from the sky. "You may be good at your letters," he said, "but your geography's mighty poor. Gettysburg ain't your home now, little lady. Your home is right spang here in the western country, the other side of the mountains." He jutted his chin out. "You don't like it much, do you?" He's talking about the West. Anne felt the tears smarting behind her eyes. She drew herself up tall. Oh, he was hateful, hateful, she thought. Then just as she had decided to walk away without answering him, his expression changed. The look on his face. He dropped his eyes to the ground, and all at once he looked both ashamed and sorry. He has hurt her feelings. He's saying, "Gettysburg in your home, this is your home. You don't like it, do you?" But then he sees that he has hurt her feelings, so he's sorry that he has. "I didn't aim to make you mad," he mumbled, shifting his feet on the ground. Anne looked at him closely. What a strange boy. A minute ago he was acting like a rooster begging for a fight, and now he was hanging his head like a whipped dog. "You thought you had him figured out one way? Then he turned around and surprised you." She didn't know what to think about him. "With all your reading," look how it's spelled, "reading and writing," he was saying, I suppose you care much for you. Start that over. "I don't suppose you care much for just playing." Okay, playing. Anne was about to answer primly that she was generally far too busy for playing, But at the last minute she changed her mind. "What kind of playing?" she asked. "Well," Andy looked almost shy. "What kind did you do back in Gettysburg?" "Oh, in Gettysburg," Anne began dreamily. As she spoke, her eyes happened to rest on the grapevine rope Andy had dropped behind him. All of a sudden she had a picture of herself and Margaret skipping rope after school. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, they would sing. Mary sat at the garden gate, eating plums from off a plate. A rhyme, a jump roping rhyme. Have you ever done a jump roping rhyme? If you haven't, ask your grandma, your grandpa, because they have and they're fun. Anne put her book and pencil down on the road and ran for the grapevine rope. "We used to skip rope," she said, "like this." She turned the rope quickly over and back, and skipped in a circle around Andy. "Can you do it?" she asked breathlessly, holding the rope out to him. Andy folded his arms deliberately across his chest. "Skip rope?" he scoffed. "Maybe in Gettysburg it's different, but where I come from, men and boys, they don't skip rope." He brought to his voice all the scorn he could gather. Oh dear, Anne thought. Now he had changed again. She should have known better. Maybe it was her turn to apologize, but before she could say anything, Andy had grabbed the rope out of her hand. "In my neck of the woods," he said gruffly, "we don't fool around with little girls' jump ropes." He turned on his heel and started down the road. For a moment, Anne felt sorry. "What do you do where you come from?" she called. Instead of answering, Andy stopped and suddenly shot the rope out within inches of Anne's feet, then made it twirl on the ground like a snake. "Oh, by the way," he said, "my ma sent me to tell Mrs. Hamilton she's feeling poorly." Okay, Mrs. Hamilton is Anne's mom, and remember, she's kind of like the area nurse. She's not, but she does take care of sick people, so she goes from home to home. So he's saying, "Oh, by the way, my mom's not feeling too well. She wants your mom to know." She'd take it as a favor of Mrs. Hamilton if Mrs. Hamilton would come and sit with her. So she says, really, would she come out and check her? Anne's mouth dropped open. "Andy MacPhail," she called, "do you mean to tell me you've waited all this time to give me that message?" She's thinking, your mom's at home sick and you're just now thinking about this to tell me. Andy was gone, walking down the hill, swinging that old grapevine in his hand. He wasn't even headed toward his own home. Anne thought with exasperation as she turned to go back to the cabin. Oh, Andy MacPhail was the worst, she decided. Of all the boys she had ever known, Andy was the worst. It's kind of an interesting interaction that they've had here. When it says Anne thought with exasperation, if you're exasperated, what does that mean? Okay, you are just really put out. You just, you are just have no more patience with what's happening. So she has no more patience with Andy MacPhail. Do just girls jump rope? No. So Andy was kind of short-sighted in thinking that, wasn't he? And his mom has sent a message that she's not feeling very well, needs to see Mrs. Hamilton. Wouldn't that have been the first thing that he should have told Anne? Yes, probably so. So it kind of makes Anne wonder if he's telling the truth at all. So she has no more patience with this new fella. She doesn't know what to think about him, doesn't really know how to take him. That is where we're going to stop. We're going to stop there. I do have a picture of Anne and her brothers and dad, possibly, or that might be her. Yeah, it looks like her brothers and her dad. Notice how she's dressed, barefooted. Okay. Remember that those are all details about the settings, and you kind of have to think when you're reading a book, the details that you have um, puts that setting in your mind, gets that picture in your mind. Whether somebody draws a picture here or not really doesn't matter. You can have your own picture in your head, and it's going to be right. That's the beauty of reading. I am not going to give you an assignment today with this book. We'll do kind of journal rights and different things with it as we go along. Anne has a big surprise coming for her down the road very shortly, and she thinks that nothing exciting ever happens out here in the West. But we're gonna stop there. We're not going to I'm not going to give you an assignment. We're just going to enjoy this book for what it is. Talk about the vocabulary. Might give you a couple of questions here or there. So it's important to follow along and know what's going on. It's got a lot of vocabulary we'll be talking about. So that's it for reading for Monday, May 11th, and I will see you in English.